I want you to just imagine for a second being dropped into a truly unforgiving landscape. Like, close your eyes and picture this harsh, completely monotonous desert.
Oh, yeah. Unrelenting.
Right. Just stretching out in literally every direction as this seemingly endless sandy plain. And the heat, I mean, it's not just uncomfortable, it is oppressive.
Like a physical weight.
Exactly, like a weight on your shoulders. And you're constantly on the move because, well, you can't build a permanent home. Standing still means you exhaust what little, scrubby grass and brackish water you've actually managed to find for your camels and your sheep.
Yeah, you stop, you die.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Sheer brute survival just consumes absolutely all of your physical and mental energy. But then, on top of those brutal elements, there is the ever-present human threat.
Which is arguably worse.
Right. You go to sleep knowing that a sudden, violent raid from a neighboring tribe could it could wipe out your entire livelihood, your family, your whole existence, just gone overnight.
And there's no one to call.
None. No central authority. No police force, no social safety net, no overarching legal system. It is literally just you, your kin, and those relentless burning sands. So the question is, if you live your entire life in that environment, how does that shape what you believe about the universe?
It's a great question.
Right. What kind of worldview or what kind of underlying philosophy grows out of that level of just profound daily vulnerability?
Well, I mean, it creates a worldview that is fundamentally rooted in chaos and unpredictability, really, because when your daily reality is governed by caprice, like the sudden unexplained failure of a rain cloud, or, the unpredictable arrival of a raiding party coming over the dunes, you naturally begin to view reality itself as capricious.
That makes totally sense.
Yeah, the cosmos doesn't feel like this grand, unified design with a benevolent architect. It feels like a fragmented, chaotic lottery. And the rules just change every single day.
And understanding that chaotic baseline is exactly where we're starting today. We're doing a massive deep dive into one of the most profound intellectual and spiritual transitions in human history.
It really is monumental.
It is. We're looking at the shift from the mindset of pre-Islamic Arabia to the incredibly complex philosophical, ethical, and political architecture of the Qur'an, using, of course, the incredibly detailed source material from a history of Muslim philosophy. We're basically looking at how an entire society rewrote its operating system.
Yeah, and the goal here isn't just to, rattle off a timeline of historical dates or have you memorize a list of ancient desert deities. We are mapping a monumental paradigm shift here.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Exactly. We're tracing how a culture moved from a worldview driven by blind, uncaring fate and endless tribal blood feuds to one anchored in universal moral accountability and a heavily structured system of social welfare. And, like we were just saying, a deeply purposeful, intentional cosmos.
So whether you're a student of history or someone fascinated by philosophy or just, insanely curious about the foundational ideas that shaped a major world civilization, we are going to dig into the underlying why today.
The why is everything.
It really is. We hear about these massive historical shifts like the rise of empires and stuff, but we rarely stop to ask what mechanics were actually changing inside the minds of the people living through it.
That's so true.
So let's ground ourselves back in that sandy plain. When you look at the historical record of pre-Islamic Arabia, the baseline is just pure necessity. These are pastoralists, nomads.
And because their struggle for mere existence was so severe, it essentially exhausted their energies.
Right.
They didn't have the luxury of developing the arts and sciences we typically associate with settled life. Think about the prerequisites for complex philosophical development. You need a surplus of resources.
You need free time.
Exactly. You need leisure time. If you are spending every waking hour trying to keep your flock alive and defending your camp and just securing the next source of water, you cannot sit beneath a tree and debate metaphysics.
Yeah, you're not going to be reading Aristotle while you're trying to find a puddle of muddy water.
No, you're really not. So your mental horizon is, out of sheer necessity, incredibly narrow. It's focused entirely on the practical, the material, the immediate.
And that intense focus on the immediate, it completely colored their theology. Their religion wasn't like this organized system. It was a really vague, fragmented polytheism. But I want to clarify something right away because this really surprised me when I was reading the source text.
Oh, about Allah.
Yes. They actually did acknowledge a supreme God. They called him Allah. But it doesn't seem like he played a major role in their day-to-day lives at all.
He played almost no role. The concept of a distant supreme creator just simply did not fit the immediate, fragmented needs of their environment.
Right.
The supreme god was treated more like a cosmic emergency contact.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, like if they were out on the desert and a terrifying apocalyptic storm rolled in, or say they were on a boat that was actively sinking, then they would invoke him. But the absolute second the danger passed and things went back to normal, he was completely ignored again.
That makes a weird kind of psychological sense, honestly. Like, if you were in a crisis, you want to speak to the manager of the universe. But for daily problems, you just go to local management.
That's exactly it. For the daily grind, hoping for rain, wanting a healthy child, seeking luck in a raid, they relied on this massive pantheon of subordinate deities.
Right.
And they worshipped three deities in particular as the supposed daughters of this supreme god. There was Al-Uzza, which translates to the Most Mighty, and she was associated with the planet Venus.
Okay.
Then there was Almanat and Alat. But their polytheism went much deeper than that into the realm of the abstract. They actually personified concepts that were crucial to their survival and social cohesion.
Like what?
Well, for instance, they worshipped a deity called Jad, which literally just meant luck.
Luck.
And they worshipped Wad, which represented friendship or affection.
Wait, hold on. How do you worship affection in a concrete way? Like, I understand worshiping a rain god, you ask for rain. But how does the worship of an abstract concept like friendship manifest in a tribal desert society?
It manifests through physical, localized idols. Even though the concept itself was abstract, the practice was incredibly raw and concrete. They worshipped rude blocks of stone.
Wow.
Yeah, and sometimes they revered specific trees, like one known as Dat Alanwat.
What does that mean?
It translates to that on which things are hung. They would literally suspend their weapons and offerings from its branches, seeking blessings for their upcoming battles.
So they're literally hanging swords in a tree, hoping it gives them an edge.
Exactly. And the sacrifices were very visceral. They would sacrifice camels and sheep, and the blood of these animals was poured or smeared directly over these sacred stones.
Just right onto the rocks.
Right onto the rocks. The worshippers would then eat the meat, operating under the belief that the deity was, pacified or pleased by the blood alone.
So the gods just want the blood.
Yes.
There's one ritual mentioned in the text that really stood out to me as like a window into how they viewed the value of life. The Akikra ritual.
Oh, the shaving of the infant's head.
Yeah. Can you explain that? Because it's wild.
Sure. When an infant was born, they would shave the child's head and sacrifice a sheep. But the underlying psychology of this act is what's really fascinating. It was essentially viewed as a ransom.
Like literally paying off the gods so they wouldn't take your kid.
Precisely. It functioned as a substitute for sacrificing the child itself, which, if you think about it, echoes older practices in the region, much like early Hebrew traditions of sacrificing the firstlings of their flocks to redeem their firstborn children.
Wow.
It shows a deeply ingrained belief that the divine forces were inherently hostile or demanding of human life, and you just had to buy them off.
So they're constantly trying to negotiate with a totally hostile environment. And they're bargaining with the forces of nature through these fragmented, blood-hungry deities.
And this association of subordinate gods with the supreme god is the technical definition of shirk.
Right, Shirk.
From a later philosophical standpoint, shirk wasn't just viewed as a theological mistake like, oh, you checked the wrong box on a religious census.
Right, it's not just a clerical error.
Exactly. It was the ultimate reflection of a fractured view of reality. If nature is capricious, the gods must be capricious. There's no unified theory of existence. Instead, you have a bunch of competing supernatural warlords, which perfectly mirrored their own fragmented tribal political society.
I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
But I do want to push back slightly on the idea that their lack of complex architecture or formal philosophy meant they had a low level of culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's really easy to picture them as just culturally empty survivalists. But they actually had a phenomenally rich vocabulary. Like, in the absence of painting or architecture or sculpture, language was their fine art.
It was everything to them.
Yeah. They were incredibly proud of their poetry, their memory, and their power of expression. The analogy that comes to mind is that this society was like a massive, highly capable hard drive filled with millions of fragmented files.
That's a really good way to put it.
Right. Like, all the processing power was there, the raw data of language, the deep intelligence required for survival, the complex social dynamics. It was all there. They just didn't have a central operating system to organize everything into a coherent, forward-moving whole.
That's a very fair distinction to make. The intellectual capacity was undeniably present, but it was channeled almost exclusively into poetry, genealogy, and oratory. You see this clearest in the figure of the Kahin.
The soothsayer, right?
Yeah, the Kahin was a local priest who served as the custodian of a shrine, but he also functioned as a soothsayer, a seer, a mediator of disputes. And when the Kahin would make a pronouncement, he didn't just speak plainly. He used this highly stylized, rhythmic, rhymed prose called saja.
Sure.
Right, he would swear these elaborate oaths by the earth, the sky, the sun, the moon, the darkness, specific plants, and animals.
It's like they're using the immense, almost hypnotic power of the Arabic language to try and manually impose some sort of meaning and order onto their chaotic world.
They were trying to weave order out of words because the physical world offered none. But the dominant philosophical conclusion they arrived at before this monumental shift we're going to talk about was deeply, deeply fatalistic.
Yeah, let's talk about Dar.
Right. The course of all events was determined by Dar, a concept that translates roughly to time or blind fate.
And if you believe time controls absolutely everything, utter helplessness in the face of Dar actually turns resignation into a virtue.
It does.
Why fight it? You can't beat time. If a drought comes, it's Dar. If your tribe is slaughtered, it's Dar.
And crucially, they had no clear concept of an afterlife.
Not at all.
Not really. They looked at the physical reality. You know, a human body dies, it decays, and is reduced to dust and bones in the desert. To their highly pragmatic, materially focused minds, the idea that those scattered bones could possibly be revived was just absurd.
Which has massive implications for morality, right? I mean, if there is no afterlife, there is no ultimate moral retribution.
Exactly.
The ledger is never balanced. If you murder someone, steal their flock, and manage to survive to old age without someone killing you in return,
Yeah.
you won. There is no cosmic justice waiting for you.
That completely defined their moral code. In a world ruled by blind fate with no ultimate accountability, might literally makes right. Virtues were strictly practical and tied directly to the survival of the group.
So what were their virtues then?
Well, they prized bravery in battle, obviously. They prized patience in misfortune, because complaining doesn't change dare. And they held extreme hospitality as a paramount virtue.
Right, like Hatim, who's mentioned in the text.
Yes, personified by historical figures like Hatim. Because in a desert, denying someone hospitality was essentially a death sentence. But above all else, the supreme virtue was tribal loyalty. You stood by your kinsmen through thick and thin, regardless of the objective moral merits of what they did.
So if your brother steals someone's camel, you don't care if he's wrong. You just fight the guy trying to take it back.
Exactly, because if the tribe splinters, everyone dies.
Wow.
And the survival mechanic gave rise to the sacred blood feud. Vengeance wasn't just anger, it was a heavy, structural obligation.
There's that crazy detail in the text about the screeching owl.
Oh, yes. The widespread belief that if a murdered man wasn't avenged by his tribe, his soul would appear above his grave taking the form of a screeching owl, endlessly crying, "Give me to drink! Give me to drink!" until the blood of his killer was spilled.
That is just such a haunting image, an owl begging for blood. But when you think about it, in a society with literally no police force, the absolute certainty of a blood feud is really the only deterrent against murder.
It's a closed loop of violence.
Driven by the absolute necessity of tribal solidarity. Okay, so that is our baseline. That is the hard drive before the new operating system is installed. We have a fragmented society, a fragmented pantheon of gods, a deeply fatalistic worldview, and a morality based entirely on blood ties and physical survival.
It's a bleak picture.
It really is. So let's explore the transition. How does a society move from that? The new framework introduces a concept of ultimate reality that just completely shatters that pre-Islamic hard drive. We go from God as a distant emergency contact who you ignore on sunny days to God as the sole, self-subsisting, eternal reality.
The paradigm shift here is absolute and uncompromising. The Qur'an posits a God who is simultaneously deeply transcendent and profoundly immanent.
Okay, let's break those terms down because they sound super academic, but they're incredibly practical to how a person views their everyday life. Transcendent means what exactly in this context?
Transcendent means he is entirely beyond time, space, and human sensory comprehension.
Okay.
He cannot be measured, weighed, or seen. The text uses the phrase, "no vision can grasp him." He existed before the spatiotemporal order, the physical universe of time and space even came into being. He is entirely other than the material world.
Okay, so that sounds like he is even further away than the emergency contact God.
Yes.
If he's completely beyond time and space, how is that not just a completely distant, unreachable concept?
Because that transcendence is paired with absolute immanence. Immanent means he is intensely active within the world and intimately present within the human soul.
Right.
The famous phrase used to describe this is that he is nearer than the jugular vein. So you have a dual concept. A reality so immense it exists outside the bounds of the universe, yet so intimate it knows your unspoken thoughts.
That is a massive cognitive leap for someone used to worshiping a stone block. Like, if the absolute essence of God is completely beyond human comprehension, how do you even begin to teach people about him? You can't draw a picture. You can't point to a statue.
You use similitudes. You use profound analogies to help the finite human mind grasp the edges of the infinite. And the most famous of these, which is just stunningly beautiful both philosophically and poetically, is the similitude of light.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
It describes God as the light of the heavens and the earth. But it doesn't stop there. It builds this intricate metaphor. It compares this divine light to a niche in a wall. Within that niche is a lamp. The lamp is enclosed in glass, and the glass is so pure it shines like a brilliant star. And the lamp is lit from a blessed olive tree that is neither of the east nor of the west. And the oil of this tree is so pure that it is almost luminous in itself, even before fire touches it. Light upon light.
I really want to spend a minute on that because it's so dense and beautiful. Neither of the east nor of the west, meaning it's not bound by physical geography or the rising and setting of the sun. It's universal.
Yes.
And the oil that glows before fire even touches it. It's like a metaphor for a truth that is self-evident, right? A reality that illuminates itself.
Yeah, and philosophically, this allegory serves as a bridge. We cannot know God's exact essence, that is the blinding light itself, but we can know his attributes, his life, eternity, unity, power, truth, beauty, justice, love, and goodness.
Okay, so the attributes are what we can interact with.
Exactly. These attributes are grounded in his unknowable essence, but he has implanted symbols or pointers to these attributes within the natural world and within our own human consciousness.
Let me try out an analogy here to help process that because it's a lot to wrap your head around.
Go for it.
If God's true essence is like a blinding, absolute white light, a light so intense it would literally destroy your eyes to look directly at it, his attributes are like a prism.
Oh, I like that.
Right. When that incomprehensible white light hits the prism, it refracts into distinct colors that we can actually perceive, understand, and most importantly, emulate. We can't comprehend infinite eternal power, but we can understand the color of justice. We can practice the color of mercy. We can appreciate the color of beauty.
That perfectly bridges the theological with the practical, because if you can understand those colors, those attributes, you suddenly have a purpose. This introduces a teleological shift.
Teleological meaning.
Teleology is simply the explanation of phenomena by the purpose they serve, rather than by postulated causes. The pre-Islamic Arabs believed the universe was a pointless accident ruled by blind fate. The new framework aggressively dismantles this.
Right.
It explicitly states that the physical universe was not created in play. It is not a cosmic joke or a random scattering of atoms. It has a definite goal. It details how the heavens and earth were initially joined as one smoky, nebulous substance, which was then cloven asunder and evolved over 6 epochs.
And the text points out those epochs aren't literal human days, right?
Yeah, exactly. It notes these epochs could mean periods of thousands or 50,000s of human years, completely rejecting a literal 6-day timeline. Everything in this universe is created with measure, proportion, and a specific order.
And if everything has order, you can't have multiple gods running around messing with the system.
No, you really can't.
The logical dismantling of Shirk, the worship of multiple gods, is so fierce in this text. It argues that if there were multiple gods, they would inevitably lord over each other and cause absolute chaos in the universe.
Right, you can't have 2 captains steering the ship of the universe. If there was a god of rain and a god of fire, the laws of nature would be constantly in conflict based on supernatural squabbles. The reliable order of the universe proves the unity of its creator.
It also heavily rejects anthropomorphism, right? Like the idea that God has human biological traits.
Absolutely. Having a literal son or literal daughters is rejected. It points out the absurdity of the idols they used to worship, noting that these blocks of stone couldn't even create a simple fly, let alone control life, death, or resurrection.
Which brings us to arguably the most radical transformation in this whole story, the redefinition of the human soul. If the universe isn't a joke and God is singular and purposeful, Where does the human being fit in?
Man is elevated from a helpless victim of fate to the highest creation. He is made in the best of molds with the divine spirit breathed into him.
Wow.
He is intended to be God's vicegerent, his representative or trustee on earth. And to achieve this, the human mind is understood through a deeply psychological framework, broken down into 3 degrees of development.
Let's walk through these because honestly, this sounds incredibly similar to modern psychoanalytic theory centuries before Freud.
It really does. So the first state is the nafs amara. This is the impulsive animalistic mind. It is driven entirely by base desires, appetites, and immediate gratification. It wants what it wants right now. Consequences be damned.
The id, like the raw survival instinct of the desert.
Precisely. If you remain in this state, you are no different than an animal reacting to stimuli. Then the second state is the nafs lawama. This translates to the conscientious mind, or the self-reproaching soul.
Self-reproaching. So feeling guilty.
Yes, this is where the internal struggle happens. This part of the mind feels guilt, feels remorse, and struggles to choose between good and evil. It is the awakening of the moral compass.
So the nafs lawama is basically the battlefield. It's the friction between knowing what you should do and what your animalistic nafs amara actually wants to do.
Yes. And the ultimate goal of human life is to navigate that battlefield and reach the third state, the nafs mutmanda. This is the mind perfectly at peace, perfectly tranquil, because it has brought its desires fully in tune with the divine will. There is no more internal friction.
I really want to pause here and just think about the psychological whiplash this must have caused.
Oh, this has been staggering.
Imagine you are an ancient Arab living through this exact transition. Your whole life, you've blamed the stars, you've blamed Dar, you've hidden behind the excuse of blind fate. Like, I'm not responsible for that raid. Time dictated it.
Right.
And suddenly this new paradigm arrives and just rips that comfort blanket away. It says, no, the universe has a purpose. You have free will. You carry a divine spark. And because you have free will, you are morally ultimately accountable for your actions.
That's a heavy burden.
How terrifying is that?
Mm-hmm.
It's the ultimate loss of an alibi. You can't blame fate anymore. But on the flip side, you gain the profound dignity of being the architect of your own soul.
It really is the birth of the autonomous, morally responsible individual in that society. It shifts the burden of existence from the external environment to the internal landscape of the mind.
But wait, if I am now individually accountable for the truth, and I will be judged on my actions, that creates a massive problem.
Mm-hmm.
How do I actually know what the truth is? Like, I can't just blindly follow what my grandfather did anymore.
And that question leads us directly to the epistemology of the Qur'an. Epistemology is simply the philosophical study of how we know what we know. How do we attain certitude?
Right.
The framework outlines a highly sophisticated system of knowledge, breaking down certitude into 3 distinct levels.
Okay, what is the baseline level of knowing something?
The first degree is ilm al-yaqin. This is knowledge gained by inference or deduction. It's theoretical knowledge.
So learning the physics of combustion. Like, I know that if oxygen, heat, and fuel combine, it creates a fire, and fire's hot. I know this intellectually.
Exactly. The second degree is ayn al-yaqin. This is knowledge gained by direct perception or objective observation.
So I walk outside and I actually see a campfire. I see the flames. I see it burning a log. Maybe I see someone accidentally touch a coal and recoil. I have observed the reality of the fire.
Yes, you've seen it. But the third and highest degree of certitude is haqq al-yaqin. This is knowledge gained by personal experience, intuition, or direct realization.
I reach out and touch the coal myself. The fire actually burns my own fingers. I don't just infer it. I haven't just watched it happen to someone else. I have experienced the reality of the heat intimately.
That progression from theory to observation to internal experience is the absolute engine of this new worldview. And what is revolutionary for a society steeped in superstition is how aggressively the Qur'an demands that people use their physical senses to gain that second degree of certitude. Knowledge by observation.
Right. It's not just blind faith.
Not at all. It repeatedly commands mankind to look at the heavens, to study the alternation of night and day, to observe the formation of clouds, the movement of the wind, and the birds poised in the sky.
Why the birds in the clouds, though? Like, what is a 7th century nomad supposed to get out of watching a bird glide?
Because by closely observing nature, you perceive the laws of nature. You see that a bird gliding isn't magic. It is relying on an unseen but perfectly measured system of wind and lift. The clouds bring rain not because a star cluster in the Pleiades magically commanded it, but as part of a structured physical cycle. It is a profoundly empirical approach. It trains the mind to look for cause and effect.
So it's basically arguing that faith and intellect aren't opposites. Using your brain, your eyes, and your ears is actually a religious duty.
It is the highest duty. And this empirical demand was a direct assault on one of the most stubborn pre-Islamic traits: the blind, unquestioning adherence to the ways of their ancestors.
Which was huge for them.
Huge. When the polytheists were challenged about their idol worship, their default response was, "Nay, we shall follow the way of our fathers."
Right.
The new framework aggressively condemns this. It argues that if your ancestors were devoid of knowledge and lacking in guidance, following them simply because they are your ancestors is intellectually lazy and moral bankrupt. Tradition is not a substitute for truth.
And it takes this demand for observation and applies it to humanity as a whole, right? It isn't just about observing nature. It is about observing human behavior over time. The study of history is basically elevated to a hard science.
Yes, exactly.
The framework frequently references the days of God. These are momentous hinge points in history, specifically the rise and fall of great nations. It tells them to study the histories of the Israelites, the Romans, the people of Ad, Thamud, and the Pharaoh of Egypt.
It commands them to literally travel the earth, to walk through the archaeological ruins of past civilizations, like the massive rock-hewn cities of Thamud, and ask themselves, what happened here? Why did this incredibly powerful, wealthy civilization collapse into dust?
And it provides the answer through one overarching, vital sociological law, which is God never changes the condition of a people until they change it themselves.
That is the core of it.
Let's just sit with that for a second. God never changes the condition of a people until they change it themselves. That is staggering. It is a historical law of cause and effect applied directly to human societies. It tells you that the fall of an empire isn't just bad luck. It's not dar. It's not a random plague or whim of the gods. It is the direct consequence of a society's internal moral decay.
It is a philosophy of history that demands active, critical reflection. You observe nature to understand physical laws, and you observe history to understand moral laws.
Right.
An empire that becomes arrogant, unjust, and hoards wealth will collapse from within long before an external enemy conquers it. Both the physical universe and human history are expressions of the same unified, rational, divine will.
Okay, so if the universe has a purpose, humans have free will and accountability, and we have to use observation and history to find the truth. What does that truth actually look like in practice?
The practical application.
Yeah, what is the moral compass? How is a person operating under this new system actually supposed to act in their daily life?
Well, the foundational ethical concept is the middle path. The framework promotes a healthy, balanced social organization that actively avoids extremes. For example, monasticism, the practice of withdrawing entirely from society, taking a vow of poverty, and denying all earthly pleasures to achieve spiritual purity, is explicitly condemned. It is viewed as incompatible with human nature and detrimental to society. Society needs good, moral people actively participating in it, raising families, and conducting business.
But on the flip side, pure materialism is also condemned, right?
Exactly. Vainglorious materialism, obsession with hoarding wealth, and defining your worth by your possessions are equally destructive. The life of this physical world is significant, it is a blessing, but it is viewed as a sojourn. It is a temporary preparation for eternity, not the final destination.
It's all about finding equilibrium.
Yeah.
And a huge part of maintaining that equilibrium is the concept of unity. We talked about the theological unity of God, but this has to translate into human behavior. There's the concept of internal unity, aligning your reason, your will, and your actions so you aren't a hypocrite. You don't just know what is good, you desire what is good, and you do what is good.
Right, that inner alignment.
But it also stresses external unity, specifically social harmony. There's this incredibly evocative metaphor regarding marriage, describing spouses as being like a garment for the other.
Oh, that metaphor operates on so many levels. Think about it. A garment provides warmth. It provides protection from the elements. It covers your flaws and vulnerabilities from the outside world. And it is the closest thing to your skin.
Yeah.
It implies mutual support, deep comfort, protection, and profound intimacy. Marriage isn't just a tribal contract for producing heirs. It is a fundamental unit of social harmony.
But underlying all of this ethical instruction, the marriage, the business dealings, the personal conduct, is the absolute unwavering insistence on free will. If you do something terrible, you cannot say it was my fate. You cannot say God ordained it. Using determinism as an excuse for bad behavior is explicitly forcefully rejected.
Because if determinism were true, the entire concept of moral accountability would collapse. The framework dictates that man is endowed with the power to choose. Now, philosophically, this creates a tension. God is the ultimate creator of all possibilities, but man is entirely responsible for the choices he makes among those possibilities. Because human beings are given reason, and natural internal bias toward good, and the clear guidance of revelation, whatever evil comes from a man is entirely from his own soul.
So we have to look closely at what constitutes good and evil in this system. What are the specific virtues and vices? Justice is paramount. It is described as being near to piety. Truthfulness, returning evil with good, and spending in charity. But on the negative side, the vices are very telling. Cowardice, hoarding wealth, arrogance, and despair. Interestingly, it also strongly condemns using magic.
The condemnation of magic is fascinating because it's not just about superstition. Magic was historically used to sow disunity. People would use curses to break up marriages or cause illness in rivals.
Oh, yeah.
So the prohibition is essentially a ban on using hidden, deceptive means to manipulate others and destroy social cohesion. But if you look closely at the virtues, justice, mercy, truthfulness, charity, you realize they're essentially the attributes of God refracted into human behavior.
Oh, the prism analogy again.
Exactly. Remember the prism. Because God is just, merciful, and knowing, human perfection lies in assimilating and developing those exact traits. Human perfection consists in being dyed in divine color. The goal of human life is the progressive achievement of all divine attributes within the limits of human finitude.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the internal struggle. The nafs lawama, the conscientious mind fighting the animalistic mind. There's a concept here regarding accountability that I find deeply compelling. The framework refers to a person's inner demons, those base urges.
Right.
There is a specific reference to a saying that every man has a Satan with him, but that the ideal is to make him a Muslim, which literally translates to one who submits. You submit your inner demon to control.
Yes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, isn't this essentially a framework for absolute ultimate psychological accountability? You can't blame the stars, you can't blame fate, you can't blame your ancestors, and you can't even use the excuse, the devil made me do it, because your job is to master your own internal impulses.
It is the ultimate internalization of responsibility. The Satan in this context isn't just an external bogeyman whispering in your ear. It represents your own internal forces of ego, greed, anger, and impulsivity. Submitting those forces to your rational moral will, making them submit to God's order, is the very essence of the moral struggle. It is the journey from the impulsive mind to the mind at peace.
But what if you fail? Because humans fail constantly. Does one slip up doom you?
No, and that is a crucial element. This system is heavily demanding, but it is not unforgiving. The framework emphasizes that God's mercy covers all things. Even thieves, even those who actively rebelled against the community, are offered a path back.
Okay, but there's a catch, right?
Yes, the forgiveness is conditional on action. They must genuinely repent, actively amend their conduct, and hold fast to the truth. The door to moral rehabilitation is always open, but it requires doing the hard work of behavioral change. You cannot just apologize to the void, you have to fix the damage you caused.
So we have built the individual. We have the theology, the epistemology, and the personal morality. The individual is now a morally accountable agent seeking justice and truth. But a society is more than just a collection of individuals. How does this scale up?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, what is the blueprint for a civilization? Because this transition wasn't just about personal enlightenment. It was about restructuring the entire world they lived in. Let's start with economics, because you want to change how a society functions. You have to change how the money moves.
Always follow the money.
Always. And the shift here is seismic. The new framework dictates that wealth is viewed fundamentally as God's gift. It is not something you created out of nothing, and therefore it is not to be monopolized by a few elite families.
Now, the individual absolutely has the right to own private property. This is not a communist manifesto. But that right to private property is not absolute. There are enforceable legal claims on that property by the wider marginalized society. This is the transition from tribal self-interest, where you only share resources with your blood relatives, to a structured, institutionalized welfare state.
And the engine of that welfare state is zakat, a mandatory charity. But it's not just a vague suggestion to, be generous when you feel like it. It is a calculated, non-negotiable tax.
The specificity of the rates shows how structural this was meant to be. It mandated 2.5% annually on cash and gold hoardings. It mandated 5% to 10% on agricultural produce, depending on how much labor was required to irrigate the land. And it mandated a substantial 20% tax on mines and discovered treasure troves.
Let's break down the mechanics of that 2.5% tax on static wealth, because I think it's brilliant.
It really is.
If you just hoard gold under your mattress, and you are taxed 2.5% of its total value every single year, eventually, your hoard will deplete. The only way to maintain or grow your wealth is to invest it, to put it into businesses, to circulate it in the economy. It mechanically forces money to move.
Exactly. It prevents stagnation. And this wealth was collected by the state and legally ring-fenced. It could only be distributed to specific categories: the destitute, the orphans, the wayfarers, travelers who ran out of funds, and those crushed by debt.
Right.
It was a structural mechanism designed to constantly siphon wealth from the top and redistribute it to the absolute bottom, preventing the extreme polarization of society.
And just as important as the mandatory giving is the list of absolute economic prohibitions. Usury charging interest on loans is strictly, severely forbidden. Why is usury such a massive target in this system?
Because usury is the ultimate tool for concentrating wealth without producing anything of value. Think about it in a tribal society. If a poor farmer has a bad crop and borrows money from a wealthy merchant at high interest, he will likely default.
Yeah, he's trapped.
Right. The merchant then seizes the farmer's land, and the farmer becomes a bonded laborer. Usury mechanically transfers assets from the desperate to the wealthy. By banning usury, you break the mechanism of monopoly. You force people to engage in equity financing, sharing the risk and the profit of a venture, rather than guaranteeing a return for the rich while the poor take all the risks.
It also completely banned gambling. And hoarding basic necessities like food to artificially inflate the price during a shortage is condemned as a severe sin.
Yes.
There's another massive structural change here regarding women and wealth. The new framework explicitly granted women the legal right to own, earn, and inherit property independently.
This fundamentally disrupted the patriarchal tribal power dynamics. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women were often considered part of the estate to be inherited.
Which is horrifying.
It is. So, granting them independent financial agency meant wealth no longer flowed exclusively down the male lineage of a tribe. This is further reinforced by the incredibly specific inheritance laws. The Qur'an lays out fractional shares for parents, children, and spouses.
How does that change the tribal dynamic, though? Like, if I'm a wealthy tribal leader, I want to leave all my wealth to my eldest son to keep our family powerful.
And that is exactly what the new laws prevented. You could no longer concentrate your estate in the hands of a single heir. Upon your death, your wealth was automatically fractured and dispersed across your extended family, both male and female.
Oh, I see.
It prevented the formation of permanent, untouchable generational dynasties. It also legally protected the right to make a will for charitable purposes up to a third of your estate before the mandatory division happened.
Okay, let me try to frame this economic and political model using a modern analogy. Think of this entire societal blueprint as a fiduciary system. In modern finance, a fiduciary is someone legally obligated to manage assets in the best interests of the actual owner, not themselves.
Right, a trustee.
Under this philosophy, you are not the CEO of your wealth. You are not the sovereign owner of your political power. You are just the trustee. You are absolutely allowed to manage the assets, generate profits, wear nice clothes, and enjoy the comforts of your hard work. But you are legally and morally bound to pay out the mandated dividends to the marginalized shareholders of society. You manage the wealth on behalf of the ultimate owner, which is God.
That fiduciary analogy perfectly captures the concept of vicegerency we discussed earlier. The state itself is merely a vicegerency, a trusteeship holding power on God's behalf. This political system is explicitly designed to subordinate politics to morality. Sovereignty doesn't belong to a king. It doesn't belong to the tribe. Sovereignty belongs exclusively to God.
And if sovereignty belongs to God, that completely changes the relationship between the citizen and the ruler. The framework states that rulers must be obeyed to maintain social order. You can't have anarchy, and this is a massive revolutionary, but that obedience is strictly conditional.
There is no cooperation in sin or aggression. If a ruler commands a citizen to violate the divine moral law, the obligation to obey immediately dissolves. The citizen's loyalty to the moral framework supersedes their loyalty to the state.
Which is huge.
Furthermore, citizens have the explicit, protected right to criticize the government. It is framed as a duty to enjoin good and forbid evil.
It also outlines freedom of conscience. It states clearly that there's to be no coercion in religion. You cannot force belief at the end of a sword, because belief requires that internal certitude we talked about. And it goes so far as to protect against having one's religious susceptibilities wrongfully hurt, promoting a really pluralistic respect. Even foreign policy is dictated by this fiduciary moral framework.
Yes, international relations were no longer based on who could raid whom. The framework outlines the absolute sanctity of treaties. It demands total honesty in international transactions. War is permitted, but its scope is heavily restricted. It is permitted for defense or to stop active oppression.
But crucially, retaliation must only be in exact proportion to the high-handedness suffered and absolutely no more.
Right.
The overarching goal is the establishment of peace and non-participation in wars directed at mere self-aggrandizement or empire building. If we pull back and look at this entire journey, it is just breathtaking.
It really is an incredible transformation.
We started in that harsh, relentless, burning desert. We started with a society defined by fragmented stone idols, where human life was incredibly cheap and your fate was dictated by the blind rolling dice of Dar.
And we walk through the dismantling of that chaotic reality.
Yeah, we watched it be replaced by a unified, deeply intentional cosmos. We saw the human being elevated from a helpless, fatalistic victim of time to a dignified, autonomous agent. An agent burdened, but honored with free will, moral accountability, and the explicit mandate to build a just society.
To truly grasp the engine of Islamic history and to understand its enduring massive impact on global civilization, you have to understand the mechanics of this foundational shift.
You really do.
It changed how millions of human beings perceived the flow of time. It changed how they understood the purpose of wealth. It changed how they viewed the inner psychological workings of their own minds. It took the immense, untapped processing power of the pre-Islamic Arab mind and gave it an operating system capable of building a world civilization grounded in a comprehensive ethical vision.
It is a stunning intellectual trajectory. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've explored today in this deep dive. This framework places immense, unyielding emphasis on the why, the teleological purpose behind our actions. It warns repeatedly against mastering the material world while forgetting the spiritual and moral goals of existence.
That's a powerful warning.
So take a hard look at our modern world today. We have unprecedented, almost godlike power over nature. We have unparalleled global wealth. We have technology that would look literally like magic to a 7th century nomad.
Unimaginable power, yeah.
But according to the philosophy we've just unpacked, if we possess all of that immense material power, but we lack the internal moral unity to use it justly, if our economic systems are still driven by base impulses, by hoarding, and by modern forms of tribalism, are we actually advancing? Or are we just building a much more technologically comfortable version of pre-Islamic fatalism? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.